Good evening, everybody. We are here with our final presentation for the 2025 Winter GOSA presentation series. Tonight we are here with Ben Vander Ley for another presentation. And Ben will be going over the activity of Opal Pool last year, one of the rare performers in the park. And with that, we will go ahead and get right to Ben.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Will, and everyone else at GOSA for having me on again this year. My name is Ben Vander Ley, and tonight, of course, I'll be talking about Opal Pool. First, a little bit about me. I've been a geyser gazer since 2019, but I've been interested in geysers since the first time I visited the park as a little kid. I've always been particularly interested in the big and rare geysers, and of course, geyser height. Last fall, I found myself in a very convenient position to be able to witness 4 of the 7 known eruptions of Opal from last year, which is why I'm going to be talking about it tonight. So, what exactly am I going to be covering? Well, I'll be starting off with an introduction to Opal Pool and a brief overview of its historically known periods of activity, then a more detailed review of the 2024 eruptions, and a sort of general discussion on the Opal Pool sit and things to look for. And then I'll be ending with a video of many of the more impressive opal bursts from last year before I go into Q&A. So to start, Opal Pool is located in the Midway Geyser Basin. It's the first feature past Grand Prismatic, going clockwise around the boardwalk loop. Despite pool being in the name, it's an exceedingly rare geyser. Its eruptions consist of muddy water, which are capable of reaching 70 feet or more, making it the second largest geyser at Midway, only behind Excelsior. The eruptions play out very similar to Spa. It sits there with a roiling boil in the middle, and every several minutes you get a burst of water. Except, unlike bursts from Spa, which sort of stack and build on each other, the opal bursts are a lot more sudden and explosive. You can get some really nice muddy blue bubbles on a lot of the bigger ones. The durations usually range from a few tens of minutes to several hours. At its best, when it's active, the eruptions are generally a few days apart at least, similar to like your fan and mortar giant, etc. Onto our historical section. I've tried to keep this section fairly brief since I'll be going into a bit more detail on the eruptions from last year, so this is going to be a bit more of a general overview. The sources for this come from a combination of different places: Marlar's inventory, Geyser Times, the Old Faithful Visitor Center electronic logs. These used to be up on the old GOSA site and are still accessible via the Wayback Machine. And of course the Sput archive, particularly an article in the October 1998 Sput, A Brief History of Opal Pool by Jean and Dunn. This article goes into some really nice detail with specific dates and eruption reports, which I'll be sort of glossing over a bit. Right now, that's probably the best place to start if you want to look a little bit deeper into the historical stuff. So, the first known eruptions of opal were seen in, of course, 1947, over the course of just a couple days in September. Marlar writes in his inventory that after analyzing the impact these eruptions had on the surrounding area, he thought opal had most likely had similar eruptions in the past. After this, there was a brief period of activity in 1950 and another in 1954. From here until 1989, the information I found was all pretty vague, but here's what I was able to find. T. Scott Bryan's book states that there was no activity from 1954 until 1979, and Geenan's article says that since 1979, up until 1998 when it was written, 1982 and 83 were the only years that it didn't have a reported eruption. I was not able to find enough information pointing one way or another to validate or invalidate those claims. Starting in 1989, we begin to have some more detailed information though. It was active in the falls of both 1989 and 1990. I was unable to find anything at all for 1991 and 92. But from here until the early 2000s, we have what is sort of the golden age for Opal Pool. Reports show that it was at least sporadically active, but probably frequent, for large portions of 1993 and 94. After this, there's at least one eruption on the books for every year through 2003, with episodes of frequent activity occurring in at least 1996, 1998, 99, 2000, and 2002, with most of the frequent activity in those years being concentrated around the fall or later in the summer. The next definitive eruption after 2003 is not until a one-off on September 23, 2014, which lasted nearly 7 hours. There could have also been an eruption in early spring 2014, based on reports of the pool being empty and some new debris in the surrounding area. Either way, there would not be more definitive activity until 2024, which brings us to our recent eruption reports. The first eruption last year was seen on July 11th at 1455. It was witnessed by Eric Hatfield, and as I understand it, he was on a trip with his family. They stopped at Midway and sort of happened upon it. He either saw it from the first burst or one of the first bursts. The report reads, "Large bursts sent water under the boardwalk, bursts every 3 to 5 minutes. End at 1532 for a duration of 37 minutes. I was in the park at the time, and I'll tell you, hearing "this is a report from the Midway Geyser Basin" over the radio when you're not expecting it is quite the jump scare. After that, nothing else would really be seen until a guide reported seeing one on the morning of September 9th. Now, there was some discussion amongst the gazing community after the first one that it could have follow-ups and that it might be a good idea to keep a little bit of an eye on it, but there did not end up being any particularly large effort to keep tabs on it during the summer, so we really don't know if this is a closed interval or not, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's not. And of course, September 9th is right after morning reactivated, so most people's attention was still mostly directed elsewhere afterwards too. But on September 17th, I was driving in the morning and saw a steam plume from the road, so I decided to stop and investigate. I got a nice 20-foot burst just as I was walking up, and I called it over the radio. Some people were out at Fountain and were able to hurry over. Overall, we got just over an hour worth of bursts, with one huge one towards the end reaching 60 feet, which is the same one that's on frame here. I should also point out that this interval might not be closed either. I know there was one point in between this eruption and the previous one, where I was driving past and saw a steam plume. I remember thinking that it had probably recovered from the September 9th eruption when I saw it, but I didn't realize until later that that probably meant it was erupting. A large part of why I stopped on the 17th was because I regretted not doing that, not checking it a few days prior when I saw the steam plume. But now that we knew it was erupting frequently for sure, it would start to get a lot more attention. The next one would be seen on the evening of the 24th by Dan Armstrong, Tara Cross, and Graham Meach. Dan was the first one on scene and got a burst at 1949. A visitor who was there told him that was the first one. This one also lasted about an hour and had one burst big enough to send a gigantic wave underneath the boardwalk. The next one after that was on October 4th. We just got an evening grand, and Dan decided to go and check on Opal while I stayed in the upper basin for a bit longer. It was already an eruption when he got there. So he sent me a text, and I was able to make a radio call before I left. I found out when I got there that some visitors had already seen it close to the start, about an hour before Dan got there. They later made an account and posted it to Geyser Times as 1814A. The post reads, "We were walking towards Opal Pool when it erupted. It was a large explosion, about 25-foot vertical, 35-foot diameter. We stayed and saw two subsequent eruptions. The second was smaller, about 8 feet high, and the third was closer to 15 feet high, about 4 to 7 minutes in between each eruption. This is probably the single highest quality post I've ever seen by a brand new Geyser Times user. So huge congratulations to Rachel and Cole Melanson for getting to witness this rare event, and thank you so much for the information. Shortly after I got there, we got a huge explosive burst, which I measured at 69 feet. This was the best opal burst I got to see all year. The eruption continued after this for quite a while, and it didn't quit until 2143 for a duration of 3.5 hours, making it the longest of the season by quite a bit. The next one was a little bit earlier than we thought it might be. I saw the steam plume from the road driving in on October 9th. I was able to make it out there in time to see 2 bursts in terrible conditions, and then it quit. Neither of the bursts were impressive. By the time the next one rolled around, I really wanted to see what it did at the start, and get the full data for an eruption start to finish. Dan and I spent a lot more time waiting for this one. Corbin Cooper and Blake Hoffer also joined the set towards the end. We were anticipating a chance for something around 1 in the morning on the 15th, so we were all out there. With no signs of activity, I decided to go back to the car for a bit to warm up. I decided to go and swing by Great Fountain real quick and check on it, and found it was very late in overflow. Everyone else decided to leave at that point since they still weren't seeing anything. We watched the first series of Great Fountain and headed back over to Opal, except there was already a good steam plume going when we got back. We ran up there and found it in the late stages of a push. Instead of backing off like Dan and I had recently seen it do in the last couple of days, it kept going, and at 2:09 we got the first burst. It was going to be super late by the end of the eruption, but we were happy and conditions were good, so we all decided to stay for the whole thing. But, of course, the eruption that started at 2 in the morning ended up having to be the longest one of the entire season by a lot. We were getting huge burst after huge burst, and it just wouldn't quit. Corbin and Blake eventually left, and after about 3.5 hours, I had to leave to get some sleep because I had to drive home that day. Dan finally called it quits at the 5-hour mark, and it was still going. I did not end up sleeping all that well that night, and so I woke up early. I stopped by just before 9, and it had drained almost out of sight by that time. And that would be the last one seen before the park closed for the winter. But thanks to Brandon Crows, Corbin Cooper, and some of the guides checking on it from time to time throughout the winter, we know it probably continued to have eruptions through December and into the new year, but it seems like it's probably stopped by mid-February. Alright, so onto the general discussion on the Opal Pool eruption and the sit. This comes with a lot of the caveats that you might expect with a rare geyser, but it's worth reiterating. The first is that most of this probably only applies when Opal Pool is already active and erupting frequently. I'd have to imagine it does something different when it's been a while, and it would also not be totally surprising for the rule to change a little bit. So, you can use this information to provide a framework for what to expect, things to look for, and a way to contextualize what you do get to see so that you can hopefully make smart choices. But it would definitely be worth verifying a lot of this for yourself before trusting it completely. It's also important to note that most of this is based on only a couple intervals of sit time. So there are probably nuances I didn't pick up on or things I didn't get to see it do. So, use this information recklessly. So the main thing you're going to be looking for at Opal is that the pool has cycles of overflow. Generally, these cycles seem to be several hours long at least, roughly 7 to 9 hours leading into the October 15th eruption. It will be full for a few hours and then drop for a few hours. The water level in between cycles drops pretty far, usually multiple feet. Once it's been in overflow for a while, it can either start a push or drop. The pushes, of course, can be of varying strength, but they can either initiate the eruption or fail and drop. Either way, the cycles always end with the water level dropping. Sorry. If you're trying to catch the eruption, the later part of overflow up until the drop is a part of the cycle you want to be sitting there for. Because of this, I found it most helpful to note the time for the cycle as when the water level began to drop, based on and I based my observations and plans around that. I really like to use this spot on the left side of the pool to gauge the water level. That little ridge is just barely poking out and would start to get taller as the pool began to drop. Of course, you should pick whatever spot works best for you. It might take a couple minutes to make sure the pool is definitely dropping, but it usually became obvious fairly quick. Once it started dropping, I personally never saw it decide to change its mind and come back up, so it felt fairly safe to leave. There we go. Now, I've been using the sort of general term push here, but generally you'll see it written down in the notes and stuff as bubbling. After it's been an overflow for a while, it can start bubbling from the center of the pool. And this is the start of your push. Now, keep in mind you can't have slight convection without a push going on. So don't assume it's in a push just because you see that. Oh. Sorry, there we go. For whatever it's worth, the one push I saw from the start began rather abruptly, but I assume that might not always be the case. There are a few stages of progression that it has to go through as the push gets stronger. The push starts with bubbling and convection from the center of the pool above the vent. It's a constant stream of bubbles, and it covers a fairly broad area, so it's pretty easy to see. The convection can start pretty small, but generally gets bigger as the push goes on. After a bit, the convection can start to create waves radiating out towards the edges of the pool. And the waves start to get bigger and more continuous as time goes on. Around this time, you may be able to hear some very faint thumps coming from the pool that sound like a car door slamming in the parking lot. At the end of a push, Opal can start having episodes of strong thumps, followed by large waves. Sorry. This is the last stage of progression before the eruption, and also where I saw the most impressive thumps of everything I saw at Opal. It is important to note, I saw it get to this stage twice and not erupt. And when I saw Opal from start, it was already in this stage when I arrived. So unfortunately, I don't have the whole timeline. But from my experience, it was about 20 to 30 minutes from the start of the push until the first big thump, if I got them. And on October 15th, I saw about 10 minutes worth of pushing of thumps before it started. On the 15th, the thumps and large waves were occurring about every 2 minutes, and there was constant smaller waving in between. After a bit, we could hear a small rolling boil begin to develop in between the thumping episodes. Eventually, instead of another series of thumps, we got a small burst of water. Given the comparisons with Spa, and the fact that I had already seen it hit this final stage twice and not erupt, I deemed this to be the official start of the eruption. Onto the eruption itself. So, as I stated earlier, the pool sits there with a roiling boil, and there is a burst every several minutes. The bursts tend to start closer together, say every 2 to 5 minutes, and tend to lengthen out in between as the eruption goes on, potentially out to 7 or 15 minutes. The roiling boil might increase suddenly before a burst, but generally there's not a whole lot of buildup prior. Any of the bursts can be pretty much any size, but a lot of the eruptions last year tended to have their largest bursts closer to the end of the eruption. As for the height, I got a lot of height measurements in the 40s and 50s, and 3 in the 60s, with the highest at 69 feet. I'm not sure whether any of the reported heights from previous years are actual measurements or just visual estimates, but they all sound really reasonable given the measurements I was able to get. Most of my smaller heights are visual estimates. And I found it really easy to underestimate the height of the bursts. And I think that's because the boardwalk is located a couple feet upslope from the pool. And the boardwalk itself is elevated 2 to 3 feet in that area. So by the time a burst reaches eye level, it's already almost 10 feet. It can be pretty easy to feel like you're standing level with the pool, and it makes everything feel smaller than it really is. To put it in perspective, when the pool is full, it's almost exactly 100 feet across. Some of the largest bursts can produce some incredible muddy blue bubbles. They tend to be very broad and pop really fast with a fantastic noise. And I never got to see it do this. Excuse me. But some of the larger bursts have so much volume that they can send a wave of water under the boardwalk. And according to people who got to see it do that, it sounds really impressive. In addition to before the eruption, there can also be thumps associated with any of the bursts. They can occur before, during, or after a burst. And while the strongest ones I felt were definitely before the eruption, some of the ones during the eruption can still be really impressive. The strength can vary quite a bit, but the very best ones that I saw easily outclass everything else I've ever seen, other than Giantess. My recommendation here, and this is a trick that'll work at Giantess, Sawmill, Oblong, any geyser where you're going to be viewing the thumps from a boardwalk, is find a spot on the boardwalk that's above one of the posts that sits on the ground, and sit or stand there. The force of the thump does not have as much boardwalk to go through, and it'll feel a little bit more crisp from those places. On to the end of an eruption. Of course, the eruption ends when the pool starts dropping and the boiling stops. But there are two ways Opal was seen to get to that point last year. The first way is that it just quits. The eruption is humming along and it's just suddenly gone. It just unceremoniously stops. Sometimes it's right after a burst, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. This is the way you want it to happen, because the other way we saw it end was that it would start really slowly winding down. The boiling would continue, but the interval between bursts suddenly got a lot longer. More than half an hour a couple of times. The bursts could still be huge too if they wanted, so you didn't really want to leave. It didn't necessarily need to stop immediately after a burst either. You could get the last burst, and then it could sit there for another 40 minutes, boiling, before it finally decided to quit. Or maybe gave you another burst. You just never know. It's just how we got both of the really long ones from last year. So, a few other things to keep in mind. Opal really doesn't seem to like the runoff from Grand Prismatic. It's a channel that goes straight along the boardwalk and into Opal Pool, and it seems to shut things down when that thing is flowing. On the eruptions where we were paying attention last year, it had usually been a day or two without Grand Prismatic runoff flowing into Opal when it finally erupted. When it's not flowing, this channel doesn't necessarily dry out completely, but you can easily tell there's barely any water at all flowing in it. And if it's sensitive to the Grand Prismatic runoff, you could also assume it's probably sensitive to the wind. That's definitely something that needs a little bit further testing, but for whatever it's worth, every eruption last year occurred either in the morning or evening, or at a time when it wasn't really that windy. Another thing to keep in mind is it's not really that punishing if you miss the start. You'll miss the best of the thumps, but there are still more throughout the eruption. And with the best bursts usually occurring later in the eruption, if you see a steam plume from the road, or hear on the radio that Opal has started, at a time when you can get quick parking, there's a good chance you could still make it for the best part of the eruption. From the road, the steam plume is off to the right here by itself, behind the trees. You're probably not going to see much steam from it at all, unless it's erupting, or something else is happening. So if you see it, it's worth stopping if you can, or at least making a post about it. The push beforehand can also generate a steam plume. So again, if you see it, there's even a chance that it might not have started yet, and you could still get some of the thumps and possibly the eruption. And that about wraps things up. Before I get into the video, I want to give a special thanks to Dan Armstrong, Tara Cross, Graham Meach, Lynn Stevens, Brandon Crows, Corbin Cooper, and Blake Hoffer for all sharing their thoughts, observations, and prior knowledge. You were all really helpful in aiding my understanding of this geyser, and I wouldn't have been able to see as many eruptions as I did, or make this presentation without you guys, so thank you so much. And with that, I'll switch over to the video.
Oh my God, that was the biggest thump I've ever felt in my life. No joke. No joke, that was the best thump I've ever felt.
Oh my gosh!
Oh my God. Holy shit. Okay, I didn't have that last time. I will say that. Was that stronger than yesterday?
That was about as strong as yesterday. Look at that! Oh my gosh. 1651, huge thump.
What was that?
It might be trying to erupt.
Yeah, this is different than last time.
This is different.
You didn't have the waves continuing last time.
No.
Oh.
I'm watching this little peninsula.
It is coming up. Whoa. Dude, it's really come up.
Oh!
Look at how far out that went. This is different.
This is way different. Waves are still continuing. Still continuing. Still going. Yeah, look at this. Way different than I've ever seen.
This is very different.
You hear that?
I heard that. That sounded like a royal.
Uh-huh.
Thump.
Dude, yes!
Oh!
it takes a while for it to burst. You know what I mean? It might take like 20 minutes for it to actually have a burst.
But you hear that?
Yeah.
Ooh. Corbin, get down.
Oh, so good.
That was really good. Wood, Mississippi has ran over here. You can wait for
Oh, we got it. That's it. Start. Let me just.
Dump. Dump. Oh, I felt one.
I'll just sit down.
Thump, thump. Huge thumps. All right, there's something.
Oh!
So I should have my phone out. I had it out, I just didn't have it out.
It thumps.
How did you even see this?
I saw the steam cloud from the road.
Did you feel the thumps first?
Big thumps. Thumps. Oh!
That made me jump.
Oh! Thump. Double burst. Nice. Wow. Oh my gosh.
Okay, that was.
It nearly reached the border. Oh, what? I didn't see how big that one got. Thumps. Oh my gosh! That was gorgeous!
Oh my god!
Woohoo!
Dude.
Oh my gosh!
That's gotta be the biggest one, right?
That was a huge thump.
Oh! Woo!
All right, and with that, I'm ready for the Q&A. I've got the I've got the chat pulled up on my thing. So Corbin Cooper asks, how infrequently was Opal Pool observed leading up to the October 4th eruption? Do we know if that 9-day interval was closed, suspected double, or not enough data? You know, I really don't know. Uh, that one happened shortly after I got to the park. I know I was sitting on Fountain quite a bit, so I personally wasn't putting a lot of time into it. And based on the eruptions afterwards, it's very possible it could have been a double. But I think that'd actually be a question for Dan. He may have been looking at it a bit more than I was at the time. But yeah, I have no idea. Alright, so Caleb asks, are the thumps still as big, even on pushes, or do they get bigger when it commits to an eruption? So this is where I really wish I had seen that push that started the eruption from the start. Because the two pushes that I saw that didn't erupt had by far the best thumps of anything I got to see. They were eclipsed even the ones during the push that I saw it erupt on. And so I don't know if the thumps necessarily got stronger, like were strong because it didn't erupt, or if they start off strong and then got weaker as the eruption got closer, or if they vary. But from what I got to see, the best thumps were on the ones that didn't erupt. How long does it take after an eruption for the pool to recover? Another really good question, and to be honest, again, it's a little bit of an I don't know, probably several hours, and it probably depends on how far down the pool drops, because it doesn't drop the same distance every time. I know the October 15th, that was the only eruption that we knew for sure where it drained pretty much completely. Um, but again, to be honest, I really was trying to minimize the amount of time I had to spend over at Midway because the traffic was so bad and everything. Usually last year, after I checked on it, after the first one that happened, I checked on it because I hadn't been over there in years. But after the eruption occurs, you're pretty much like you're free. You don't have to visit Midway for a couple of days. So uh, I didn't look very closely at it. I pretty much just waited until there was a reasonable chance of an eruption in the next couple days before I even thought about heading back over there. All right, let's see. What do you think the shortest possible interval could be? Um, that's a good question. I know from looking through some of the other records that it's had intervals as short as a couple of days. And so, it really depends because, it puts out a substantially smaller amount of energy than some of the other rare geysers that like to erupt once a week. But, it's its own thing and it has its own character. So I could see it maybe going a little bit under 2 days, but surprises happen. I probably would have to go with whatever the shortest that has been seen though is, which I'm pretty sure is right around that 2-day mark. Let's see. You said you were expecting a 1 a.m. eruption on October 15th. What signs led you to that day or time? So that would be at the time leading into the October 15th eruption, we were seeing overflow cycles about every 7 to 9 hours as best we could figure out. There's, I would skip ones and okay, that's a double. It's like 15 and a half hours. It's probably a couple 7.5s, something like that. So we had seen the previous cycle end at, I want to say 1600 or so the previous day without a push. And so we were just sort of guessing, okay, get there at about midnight, maybe close to 1 o'clock. It'll probably drop. The drop will probably be ready to happen by about 1:30 or so, if we don't get anything. Uh, what were your favorite spots on the boardwalk for measuring the burst height? Anywhere I could recognize on maps. Uh, it pretty much was completely dictated for me based on where the steam wasn't going. You don't have a particularly wide angle of variety of places you can see it from. So if you can find a spot where the steam isn't in the way and you can recognize where you're standing on maps, I was fine with that. And of course, I didn't have a baseline ready for it, so I was just taking a picture of okay, right here on the boardwalk, this is where I was, and then when I got home, I would pull the distance and grab the elevation data and all that. Let's see. Were there ever any bursts that rose up from an empty crater towards the end of an eruption, or was there generally water in the crater throughout the entirety of the eruption before dropping? All of the bursts came from the full pool. As soon as that pool started dropping, even an inch, and you could tell that it wasn't coming back up, it was over. It's done. And you could also usually tell because the boil has quit. Everything has quit. It's over at that point. But I have to imagine bursts from an empty pool, if they could theoretically happen, would be pretty huge. What was your favorite eruption you saw? Man. This is kind of a dumb answer, but I have a really hard time picking a favorite other than the third one I saw, which was absolute garbage. Yeah, the October 15th eruption was a huge success, and I was super happy to be able to get the start, and it had probably the best consistency of bursts, the duration, and all that. But the best single burst I got was on the October 4th eruption, and the only good daytime one I got was on September 17th. So it's really hard to choose between those three, to be honest.
Okay. Okay. Looks like we don't have any more questions coming in here. So with that, we will go ahead and thank you for Ben to present here, and thank you to all of our presenters for this entire series. Greatly appreciate all of you sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with the community at large. There's always an infinite number or infinite amount of knowledge to be gained about these geysers, and we do plan on having this series next year. Do you think over the summer, if you wanted to host a presentation, talk to any of the board members or myself, and we can give you an idea, give you some feedback, and be thinking about what we can present next year. And with that, we will all see you next year. Thank you.